In 1930s Connecticut, a fire investigator named Benjamin Lee Whorf was doing his job, examining the cause of industrial fires for the Hartford Fire Insurance Company. He noticed something odd. Workers were extremely careful around drums labeled gasoline. They kept their distance, they didn't smoke nearby, they treated them with appropriate terror. But in the area where the empty drums were stored, completely different behavior. People were careless. They leaned against them. They lit cigarettes. One of those cigarettes started a fire that burned the building to the ground. The drums weren't empty. They were full of gasoline vapors, which are more flammable than the liquid itself. The workers knew chemistry. They knew fire. What they didn't know was that a single word, empty, had quietly overwritten their perception of physical reality. Whorf wasn't a linguist. He was an insurance man with a chemistry degree who watched language cause a fire. And that made him ask a question that would consume the rest of his life. Does the language you speak shape what you're capable of perceiving? The answer is more disturbing than yes, and more disturbing than no. Point number 7, your language is running in the background. You have no idea what it's doing. Whorf died in 1941 before anyone could test his idea properly. It took 60 years, a more precise hypothesis, and laboratory conditions to find out if he was right. What he had built, what is now called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, comes in 2 versions. In its strongest form, language determines thought, it has been largely rejected. In its weaker, empirically supported form, language systematically tilts thought. It has decades of experimental evidence behind it. The experiments are not subtle. Whorf's insight from the fire. The word empty in English carries a shadow meaning of inert, safe, nothing to see here. The workers weren't being reckless. They were being perfectly rational inside their linguistic framework. The language had already decided what the situation meant before any conscious thought occurred. Your language is doing this constantly, you are not tracking it. Number 6 is where someone ran the experiment and measured exactly how much faster a different word makes a different brain. Point number 6, Russian speakers can see a color boundary faster than you. Your dictionary is responsible. Russian has 2 completely separate words for blue. Goluboy for light blue, sini for dark blue. Not shades, categories. The way English treats green and blue as separate things, Russian treats what English calls light blue and dark blue. Russian speakers spend their entire lives making this distinction in language, so researchers measured what happens when they have to make it under time pressure. The result, your brain, having lived inside one linguistic category called blue, is measurably slower at distinguishing light from dark blue than a Russian speaker's brain. Specifically, when the colors cross the linguistic boundary, within a single Russian category, both brains perform identically. Across the boundary, the Russian brain is faster. A language had been training perception for decades, in the background, without asking. The Himba people of Namibia show the same mechanism in reverse. Their language has no separate word for blue and green. Show them a circle of green squares with one blue square, and the blue square is nearly invisible to them. The one a native English speaker spots immediately, automatically, without effort. But show them a circle of green squares with one slightly different shade of green, a distinction their language marks, and they find it in the time it takes you to blink. Your language is not translating the world for you, it is filtering it before translation begins.
Aristotle observed that perception is shaped by prior categories. He called this hexis. I see the discipline has spent 2 millennia arriving at the same conclusion. Progress of a kind.
Number 5 takes the same logic and aims it at your retirement account. Point number 5, your grammar might be making you poorer. The evidence is contested, the question isn't. Keith Chen, a behavioral economist at Yale, argued that languages with obligatory future tense, where grammar forces you to mark tomorrow as separate from today, the way English requires "it will rain" rather than "it rains tomorrow," may psychologically push speakers to treat the future as further away. Saving money is current pain for future pleasure. Smoking is current pleasure for future pain. A language that grammatically separates future from present might make both harder to reason about clearly. Now, this is where it gets complicated, because language and culture grow together, and pulling them apart statistically is genuinely difficult. The follow-up study found the correlation weakened significantly when controlling for the historical relatedness of languages. German-speaking populations save more partly because of German cultural values around thrift, values that share deep historical roots with the language itself. But the numbers, even weakened, are not zero. Speakers of languages without obligatory future tense were 31% more likely to have saved in any given year, and had accumulated 39% more retirement wealth at the same income level. So whether your grammar is silently affecting your retirement savings remains genuinely open. What is not open? The possibility that grammatical structure shapes how your brain handles time. That question is alive, productive, and uncomfortable. Number 4 is where the evidence stops being contested and starts being clinical. Point number 4, there are emotional states you are navigating without a map, because your language never gave you one.
Nope.
Every language contains words for emotional experiences that other languages do not name. This is usually presented as charming cultural trivia. It is not charming. Saudade in Portuguese, a longing for something beloved that is gone or perhaps never existed, combined with the knowledge that it may never return. Not nostalgia, not sadness. A third thing entirely, with its own texture and weight. Mami Hlapina Tapay in Yagan, a nearly extinct language from Tierra del Fuego, the silent exchange between two people who both want the other to initiate something and both know the other won't. One word, an entire human situation, complete. English speakers experience all of these states. The question the research asks is not whether you feel them. It's whether having a precise word for a state changes how your brain processes it. And here, the data is specific. When people have exact linguistic labels for emotional states, they perceive those states faster in others, regulate their own responses more accurately, and the emotional experience itself is handled differently in the brain. Without the word, the feeling doesn't disappear. It exists as a shapeless pressure, real but unexamined, with no clear point of entry.
The Greeks had pathos, eros, thumos, thornos, each a distinct affliction. They were not healthier for it. The vocabulary did not save them.
Number 3 is where this becomes a clinical measurement. Point number 3, the resolution of your emotional life is a direct function of your vocabulary. Emotional granularity is the technical term for how precisely you can distinguish between your own internal states. High granularity means you experience resentment, disappointment, shame, humiliation, and exhaustion as genuinely different states that call for different responses. Low granularity means you experience all of them as a blunt category called feeling bad and act accordingly. 2 decades of research have connected this distinction to outcomes that are not abstract. Higher granularity predicts lower rates of depression and anxiety. Lower granularity predicts higher rates of binge drinking, aggression, and self-destructive behavior. Across clinical populations, mood disorders, PTSD, substance use, personality disorders, eating disorders, low emotional granularity appears consistently as a transdiagnostic marker. The mechanism your brain uses to process emotion depends on the concepts it has available. Concepts it learned through language. When your body sends a signal, your brain searches for the nearest matching concept. If your emotional vocabulary contains only bad and good, the concept it retrieves is blunt. The response it generates is blunt. The outcome is frequently wrong. Same physiological signal, different word, completely different life trajectory. Expanding your emotional vocabulary is not self-improvement content. It is a structural modification to how your brain categorizes lived experience. The more precisely you can name what you feel, the more accurately your brain can respond to it. Your language set the resolution of your inner life when you were small. Most people never revisit the factory settings. Number 2 is where it stops being about your vocabulary and starts being about everyone else's. Point number 2, every time you speak, you are placing a bet that the other person's decoder matches yours. It does not. In 1960, philosopher W.V. Quine published a thought experiment that has never been satisfactorily answered. You are with a field linguist studying an unknown language. A rabbit runs across a field. A native speaker points and says, Gavagai, the word means rabbit. Except you cannot actually verify that. It could mean running thing, that specific rabbit. Or half a dozen other interpretations that Quine spent the rest of his career cataloging, each one equally consistent with the evidence, and none of them distinguishable from the others through observation alone. Quine's extension, the part that keeps philosophers awake, is that this isn't unique to unknown languages. You are in exactly this position with every person you speak to in your native language every single day. You have never had direct access to another person's meaning. You have only their words and your assumptions about what those words mean to them, which are your assumptions built from your experience inside your linguistic framework. Perfect communication, total meaning transfer from one mind to another may not be impossible in practice, but it is, as far as anyone can determine, impossible in principle. And yet, improbably, partially messily, it works often enough to build the thing you're watching this on.
Every translation is a small burial. The original meaning interred. A monument erected in its place. Visitors mistake the monument for the thing itself. They always have.
Number 1 is what happens when someone tries to fix all of this at once. Point number 1, someone spent 45 years designing a perfect language. The human brain cannot run it. John Quijada is an American linguist who spent 45 years building Ithkuil, a constructed language engineered to be maximally precise, minimally ambiguous, and as close as a spoken human language can get to expressing what a brain actually contains. The result has 96 grammatical cases. It requires speakers to encode inside the verb form itself the evidential basis of every claim, whether they witnessed it directly, inferred it from evidence, heard it secondhand, or experienced it in a dream. You cannot say it is raining in Ithkuil without simultaneously telling the listener exactly how you know. The two-word sentence tramloy hasmaspzuktoks translates to, on the contrary, I think it may turn out that this rugged mountain range trails off at some point. Nobody can speak Ithkuil fluently, not a single human being, including Quixada himself, who takes between 10 and 15 minutes to construct a simple sentence and who acknowledges this freely. His explanation of why the language exists anyway is the most honest statement about human communication ever made. Ithkuil is not designed to be spoken. It is designed to demonstrate the size of the gap between what your brain contains at any moment and what your language is actually capable of transmitting. You are thinking things your language cannot say. You have always been thinking things your language cannot say. Every conversation you have ever had has been, to some degree, a controlled failure. And while you've been having those conversations, languages have been disappearing, one every 3 months by current estimates. Each one a different cognitive toolkit, a different way of organizing time, color, causality, the self. When a language dies, it doesn't take its words. It takes the thoughts that only existed inside those words. Whorf watched one word burn down a building. 7,000 linguistic universes are burning down more slowly. We are not watching. So, an insurance inspector noticed that a word caused an explosion. Your brain sees color boundaries faster in some languages than others. Your grammar may or may not be affecting your retirement savings. The research is still fighting about it. The emotions you cannot name, you navigate with a blindfold. Your emotional vocabulary is setting the resolution of your inner life. Every conversation you have ever had involved imperfect meaning transfer. And the most precise language ever built takes 15 minutes per sentence and has 0 fluent speakers. Your language has a blind spot. It is the exact shape of everything you were never given a word for. Drop a comment. What's the word from another language you wish existed in English? Because apparently we need to start building. And that's how spaghetti untangles the language we think in. See you in the next episode.